Nano Machine by Hanjo Leolia. Chapter 414. Collapse of the Ice Palace. Part 1. DRRR. The Office of the North Sea Ice Palace. The intense vibrations caused all the furniture to vibrate and the office decorations to fall. Two people were casually talking. Perhaps they were getting used to the continuous vibration, which only got worse with time. They were Dan Jushin, deputy king of the palace, and Seol Young Gwi, the first elder. This is a problem. Word is quickly spreading among the officials in the palace. How long has it been? Dan Jushin shook his head with a disappointed face. The news that Prince Baekhyun, the previous king's rightful successor and the lord of the demonic cult, led a contingent into the palace spread quickly. Thanks to that, news of the successful arrival of Yulin's contingent got buried. It is going completely different from the original plan. Ugh. Dan Jushin wanted to use the success of his dispatch request to change the minds of several officials and direct members of the palace who didn't support him becoming king. Instead, the prince, whose credibility had been lost in the palace, came back to highlight the unreasonable selection of the heir. The lord of the demonic cult can't be considered since there was no official request sent to them. They could have used that excuse if it hadn't been for the lord of the demonic cult, Chun Yoan. Everyone hated admitting it, but after seeing his high skill level while crossing the lake, it was hard for anyone to make a move. The Ice Palace was already having a hard time dealing with the dragon turtle, and they couldn't afford to create a stronger enemy. Even if it was too much, should I have tried to defeat the monster with just the palace warriors? It was a regret. But soon after, he realized that such a thought was foolish. A four-headed dragon is almost a disaster-class spirit beast. It was completely unknown if there would be any piece of the North Sea Ice Palace left if they dealt with the dragon turtle alone. Right. It's impossible to ascend to the throne of the palace without making any sacrifices. Dan Jushin wanted absolute power in the North Sea Ice Palace. The fact that he was able to overtake the prince and take office as the deputy king was only possible because of the support of the senior officials. It was better to act safely than sacrifice everyone around him. It is highly unlikely that the prince will stay in the limelight for a long time. Well, the Senate officials are showing interest in the lord of the demonic cult. Those old people in the back room are quite meddlesome. Crack! The handle of the chair that Dan Jushin was sitting on cracked as he released his energy. The Senate officials had stopped him from time to time. Starting from the time when the former deceased king competed with Dan Jushin for the position of king. This much should be enough. Seol Young Gwi was satisfied looking at Dan Jushin's expression. His real purpose was to stimulate ill feelings towards the prince and make the deputy king consider the prince a threat. He thought that the deputy king wouldn't make a move since the prince is his nephew and disciple, but that didn't seem to be the case. You shouldn't turn weak just because the person who decided to walk alongside you is a blood relative. Sympathy is not a good emotion. In order to do that, the bloody path should be faced head-on. In his mind, Seol Young Gwi wanted to advise Dan Jushin to eliminate the prince right away, but looking at his reaction on the watchtower, it wouldn't happen anytime soon. Dan Jushin asked. And their accommodations? For now, only the leaders of both Yulin and the demonic cult are being given entry into the royal palace's VIP side. Temporary barracks are being set up on the west side of the palace. Ugh, too many people. Originally, they only prepared residences for the Yulin contingents. However, as the number of people increased, the accommodations inside the palace weren't enough, so they had to set up barracks. Once the dragon affair is resolved, we will have to expand the palace and increase the number of guests. I don't think the prestige of the palace will stand tall if we don't change. I understand. Leave it to this old man. Elder Seol Young Gwi agreed to it. Since the North Sea Ice Palace had never accommodated so many guests before, it felt like an expansion had to be done. I hope nothing goes wrong tonight. The vibrations had recently grown stronger. Now it was almost like an earthquake was happening right below their feet. The source of the vibrations was where the dragon was sealed, yet the tremors would shake the entire palace. There was something wrong, and they tried to think of what was wrong, but they couldn't understand why the entire palace shook. It's strange how no one is surprised that the palace is shaking like this. Isn't it? Mun Hu Bong, who was looking at Mun Ku, was shocked by the shaking and looked to the side. Instead of standing tall, Mun Ku was clinging to Chen Yuan. She wasn't scared at all. Instead, she was smiling. He. I am fine. My support here is pretty strong. Grab. You do what you want. The 6 swords all laughed at Hu Bong's ridiculous words as he pouted. What kind of stupid expression are you making? Pwah. Chen Yuan ended up laughing out loud. Walking down the hallway to get to the VIP residence reminded him of the old days in the academy. In a way, those were enjoyable times for him. Don't worry too much. Our palace is built out of a single stone, it is unlikely for it to collapse, despite the shaking. The lieutenant of the Snow Sword troops, Oh Young, who was guiding them to the VIP rooms on the 4th floor of the palace, spoke with a smile. Although the palace shook quite a lot, it was weird to see that there were no cracks. Unable to believe, Hu Bong spoke. If this is moderate shaking, then fine, but won't this come down with stronger shaking? Well? I think it will be fine. Ah. Here. There are cracks on this side. Looking at the wall of the hallway, Hu Bong pointed to the thin cracks. It wasn't that bad, but Hu Bong, who never witnessed such a thing, couldn't help but worry that the palace would collapse. Puck. Ugh. Calm yourself. Such nonsense. Is this your bedroom? You keep making noises. Hu Bong only became silent after being hit on the back of his head by a huge palm. Oh Young smiled awkwardly at that. Actually, he was shocked in his heart. The demonic cult he knew was supposed to be made up of rude and strong people with warlike tendencies, but seeing them up close, they were no different from normal people. Tack. Chen Yuan placed his hand on the cracked wall. Nano. What is the condition of this building? I will scan and check the condition. Along with Nano's voice, a faint light escaped from Chen Yuan's palm. Mun Ku, who was the only one next to him, looked at Chen Yuan. Eventually, Nano told him the results. As a result of scanning the cracks in the wall, it is a crack that has progressed recently. As the damage is progressing at a rapid rate, the building is. Rumble. Whoa. The palace shook again. This time, it was a lot stronger than before. The palace even wobbled a little. Even Oh Young, the lieutenant of Snow Sword troops, who just comforted Hu Bong, looked around bewildered. What? Did it shake like this before? Until yesterday, there was only one huge vibration at a time. And then it would get quiet for a long time, but this time, the interval between the vibrations was very short. This time, Sama Chek, who had been calm till then, asked. Is this really okay? It was scary. And Oh Young couldn't tell the guests of the North Sea Ice Palace that they weren't in a safe place. Firstly, he felt like he had to calm the anxious people and then report to the Deputy King right away. Although the vibrations are a bit severe, the palace is built out of a single stone, so it won't collapse. Rumble. Crack. Before he could even finish his words, the entire palace shook again. As a result, fragments from the cracked area fell to the floor. Everyone's faces went stiff. and Hubong began to break out in cold sweat. "Excuse me, is this really okay?" There was a crack in the ceiling of the palace, which was supposed to stand strong. They didn't fall since they were all well versed in martial arts techniques about keeping their balance, but if there were any civilians inside, they would have fallen. "I will report this to the deputy king of the palace, so I think that it would be better for our distinguished guests to go outside the palace. Follow me." Oh Young took the lead and tried to guide them outside. It was then. Rumble. Drrrk. Wah. T the building. This time the palace swayed from side to side along with the vibrations and ended up leaning to one side. Perhaps it was the impact that caused a huge change in the ceiling on the side of the wall, which was already cracked. Crack. The ceiling and wall, which was supposed to be made of a single stone, cracked and was about to collapse. Flustered, Oh Young pointed to the window at the end of the hallway and screamed, "You need to jump out." He wanted them to get out. However, the fact that they were on the upper floor, which was collapsing, made it difficult. Rumble. Rumble. Ugh. The floor. The floor cracked like it was going to break. Even Oh Young, who had gotten used to the vibrations, couldn't help but lose his balance. At that very moment. Bang. Crack. Even those who learned the North Sea's cold chi wouldn't be able to create such a chill. At that moment, frost began to form on the floor, which was about to collapse, and the cracks ended up freezing. Shockingly, that wasn't the only thing. As if the ceiling that was about to collapse was held by someone, every piece which was falling stopped midair. Goo. A heavy dust cloud filled the floor. What is this? Oh Young saw that Ko Wonger, Hubong, Mong Mu, and Great Guardian Mara Kim all had their hands stretched out. 3 superiors masters and 1 supreme master had stopped the fragments falling from the ceiling midair. And no way. Cold energy radiated from the center of Chen Yuan, the lord of the demonic cult's right foot. The cold energy made the floor freeze. How can he use such extremes? Unlike Oh Young, who was surprised, Hubong was on the verge of death. Quack. I knew this would happen. This was why I was anxious. He raised his energy to the sky in a hurry, but it was impossible for him to support the floor. If it hadn't been for the 4 of them acting at the perfect time, the ceiling would have collapsed right away. Shaking. Ugh, this is too hard. I think you and the Lord should head out first. He is right. Lord. Mara Kim spoke in a trembling voice as he was also struggling with the task at hand. What they were doing was a temporary measure. They couldn't stand there and keep the ceiling up forever. All they could do was hold it up temporarily. Lord. Mun Ku. Samachak. Che Takim. Move. As Ko Wonger shouted at them. Chen Yuan, who was holding the floor with cold energy, asked Oh Young, who was on the ground. This is collapsing, it shouldn't matter if we break it, right? It was an incomprehensible choice of words. Irrespective of that, Chen Yuan ordered the 4 people holding the ceiling. Ugh. Hang on a little longer. Why yes. Leaving the 4 struggling warriors behind, Chen Yuan raised his hand. That was the moment when something amazing happened. Crrrk. The frost condensed with a stronger energy, and hundreds of ice swords were created in the hallway. Nano. Panel mode. According to the user's command, the remote panel system has been activated. Destroy it all without leaving anything behind. Understood. Target lock on. When Chen Yuan gave the command to Nano and extended his hand to the ceiling, the ice swords all aimed for the ceiling. Wing. And the swords pierced the ceiling. Slash. Sha. Sha. Bang. The ice swords all dug into the ceilings at once. Even Lieutenant O Young of the Snow Sword Troops couldn't help but feel astonished. Goodness! He could see why Chen Yuan asked him that. The ice swords that had dug into the ceiling were smashing the walls too. Qua! 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 Quang! Shockingly, the wall and ceiling fragments shattered so fast that not a single person was hurt or scratched. It was a truly marvelous sight. Human? Chapter 4:15. Collapse of the Ice Palace. Part 2. Rumble. The building collapsed because of the strong tremors. The palace didn't just collapse on the guest room side of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. It happened all over the entire palace at the same time. Everyone who thought that the palace made out of a single stone would never collapse saw that it could. Crack! Cracks appeared on the walls of the palace's main building, which had its red tiles covered with white snow. The walls began to crack, and the structure wobbled. Earthquake! Escape! Shouts erupted from everywhere, and the people in the palace began to run out. No one was an exception. Elders, the deputy, and the officials who were on the top floor of the main building all tried to escape from the palace, which was going to fall. Bang! Dan Jushin broke the wall of the building and jumped out. He was lucky that he was in a corner room on the top floor. If he had been in the middle of the palace, it would have been difficult for him to escape. Thud. This can't be. Seol Young Gwi, an elder, jumped from the palace and landed next to Dan Jushin. He couldn't hide from what he was seeing. The ice palace was collapsing in all directions. Dan Jushin had the same reaction. He looked at the main building, which had cracks in the walls, with distraught eyes. Why is this happening when I am trying to get my position? A disaster that had never happened since the creation of the Ice Palace. Dan Jushin's gaze turned to another place. Achk! Help me! As the main building collapsed, the screams from the inside grew louder. Just as there were people who managed to escape at the right moment, there were also those who couldn't, and they were killed or stuck under the rubble. What used to be a single stone, which would never collapse, turned into rubble. If it were built with wood, except for those with horrible luck, everyone would have managed to escape outside. Rumble. The main building, which had tilted to one side, couldn't bear weight since the palace's pillars were broken, and the building was on the verge of falling. Quack! Dan Jushin, deputy king, hurriedly moved and spread cold chi on the broken pillars. Swoosh! White cold air gushed out of his hand and supported the broken pillars. Thanks to that, the collapse of the main building, which was going to happen right away, was postponed. Looking inside, he shouted, "Come on, escape!" He escaped in a hurry, but half the people and officials inside hadn't come out yet. And those who heard the shout from Dan Jushin hurriedly ran out. Whoop! Many were found by rocks that fell from the ceiling. Many were in shock. Help the others escape and freeze the building. Why yes. The warriors of the Ice Palace, including the elders who escaped, all joined in to delay the collapse of the palace. Suddenly, they remembered that the leaders of the Wulin were being escorted to the VIP rooms. Elder Seol. Find our guests first. Understood. Seol Young Gwi stopped using cold chi and got on the move. It was because the VIP side of the room was quite high up, and it would be difficult to get them out if that part collapsed. Seol Young Gwi's face hardened as he moved towards the VIP building. The VIP building, which couldn't handle the vibrations, had collapsed to the ground. This is bad. When a guest gets into an accident or gets wounded, such a situation can never be rectified. Shocked, he hurried towards the building, and fortunately, he saw the guests from the demonic cult a little further away. And it wasn't just them. Even those from the Yulin who were all covered in dust and gasping for air were there. Huh. HIA. It could have been worse. Huang Boneng of the Huangbo clan sighed in relief as he looked at the wreckage. Seeing that, Moyong Kong too nodded and answered. If the ceiling hadn't been broken, we would have died. The leaders of the Yulin were in their rooms on the 3rd floor, and they were almost crushed to death by the sudden collapse. However, the ceiling, which should have collapsed first, suddenly froze, giving them time to escape. I'm so glad you are okay. Thank God. Seol Young-gwi approached the officials of the Yulin. The one who responded to him was Jigul Sohee, whose shirt was soaked in blood. Since she was a woman, she had been given a separate room, and because she wasn't able to react quick enough, debris had fallen on her. What just happened? Didn't you say that the cave where the dragon turtle has been sealed is far from here? It was the movement of the dragon which had been trying to escape that created the vibrations. It was said that the vibrations became stronger as the dragon turtle grew, and it seemed like it was moving. This old man is shocked as it all happened suddenly. If the dragon turtle has broken through the Adularia stones, someone must have. No. Has the seal been lifted? Seol Young-gwi looked in the direction where the dragon turtle had been sealed. At the same time, from the mountains to the north of the ice palace. Unlike the ice palace, where the vibrations were at the peak, that place looked exceptionally quiet, except for the sound of cold winds. The mountain that had the dragon turtle sealed inside it. There was nothing but silence around it. 500 warriors emit cold chi in the cavity lit by fluttering torches with their palms to the floor. This is strange. Elder Omubong and Seol Ijong, who were concentrating on the ice, were confused. Their expressions were stiff. Their hands were placed on the floor, infusing cold chi, but something felt off. I can't feel the heartbeat. Usually, when they would place their palms on the ground, they could feel the dragon moving. The floor was supposed to shake because it kept on trying to break through the ice, but it wasn't happening anymore. Not a single movement. There is no way it died from exhaustion. It was the dragon that hadn't died despite being frozen for hundreds of years. Elder Seol Ijong, who thought that something was strange, suddenly remembered something and stood up. Move, I need to check something. With that, he looked at the opening of the cave. He climbed out of the cave and went to the top of the mountain. Please. He hoped that his premonition would turn up wrong. Shortly after, a shocking sight greeted his eyes. The building, the ice palace in the south, was collapsing. And no way. At the scene that followed, Seol Ijong's eyes trembled. Bang! Although it had fallen, there was something which could be seen. In the middle of the collapsing ice palace, something long and humongous appeared. From the ground. It had long black scales on his body and a dragon's head. Dr. Dragon Turtle. It was their delusion that they thought it was locked up in the cave. Quack 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 wang. The sound of something trying to come up from the ground. Everyone could hear it. It wasn't a simple earthquake. Everybody was warned by their 5 senses. Well, something is coming. Growling. And the ground in front of the main building of the ice palace curved in on itself with slight tremors until something huge appeared. Crack. Hue. Everyone held their breath as they looked at it. A long and broad shadow was visible through the dust. At first glance, it looked like a dragon, no, more like an amugi, but the body seemed different. It looked like the spirit beasts that people once looked at in ancient books. The only unexpected part was that it was so much bigger than what they imagined. How could this happen? Does that mean that it didn't try to climb up the Adularia stones, but went through the ground to get out instead? Looking at the long and huge neck of the dragon, which appeared in front of him, Dan Jushin couldn't hide his shock. The reason why the vibrations were getting stronger wasn't because the dragon was getting stronger. It was because he was getting closer to the ice palace. We felt him until a while ago. Elder Omubong looked at the dragon in fear. This meant that the evil creature moved away by digging up the ground and only kept on returning to the original place to deceive the humans. We kept looking down on the dragon. Spirit beasts aren't ordinary animals. Their wickedness could be compared to that of humans. Grunt. Dan Jushin looked at the ice palace, which had been destroyed by the dragon, grunting as he took out his weapon and flew for the dragon's long neck. You destroyed the palace, so in return for that, I will take your head. Visor. Dan Jushin took out a single weapon, the snowfield blade, which began to release cold chi to strike down the dragon covered in black scales. But, whoa. And no way. Even when the sword was releasing chi, it couldn't pierce the scales. It was as if the scales were made of cold iron. The sword was the only thing that trembled. He was shocked for a brief moment, but Dan Jushin didn't give up as he swung his sword again. Clang! 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 Instead of piercing the scales, all his sword could do was leave behind a small scar. The only damage happening was to Dan Jushin's pride. Kawaiakak. Ugh. My ears. Everyone covered their ears at the loud roar. It was then. Flash. Flash. Ack. Run. A flash of light appeared in the body of the roaring dragon turtle, causing a strong electric current to bounce everywhere. Everything was so sudden that no one knew where to escape. And Dan Jushin was no exception. Shock. He created a shield using cold chi, but it broke in an instant as he got thrown 30 feet away. Quack. Thud. Dan Jushin, who stopped rolling on the ground, couldn't hide his disappointment. There were no significant injuries, but he couldn't hide his displeasure. It had been a few years since he reached the Supreme Master level, and no one was a match for him. However, he didn't realize that he would be so powerless in front of that creature. It was indeed a creature worthy of being called a disaster. How can we succeed? The fact that he could only scratch the scales meant that no physical attacks would work on that monster. The body of the dragon turtle was as strong as a gold ingot. We need to work together to find a weakness, or they wouldn't be able to kill it. Dan Jushin looked around. He shouted to the warriors who were wandering around the wave of lightning that the dragon caused. Calm down. Warriors. If we don't get rid of the monster today, the palace will never stand. Why yes. Dan Jushin, including the elders who were panicking, calmed down. As the top leaders stepped forward, the warriors who were scattered were brought under control. Rumble. At the same time, the troops of the Yulin, who were on the outskirts of the palace, discovered the dragon turtle and tried to come over. It was then. Quack-quack-quack-wang. Another vibration came from the ground, along with another head of the dragon popping up from the broken ground. Ugh. A different head? The dragon turtle sealed in the ice palace was a four-headed spirit beast. The newly protruding head of the dragon let out a menacing roar, preventing people from moving. Quaaha. This. Everyone move. Avoid. The ones in the lead shouted. At the same time, just as it happened a moment back, a wave of lightning occurred from the dragon turtle's roar. Crack. Crackle. The warriors of Yulin turned around to run. However, it was difficult to respond immediately as the dragon's attack was fast. Quack. Keep going. Some warriors bounced away after getting hit by the wave of lightning. They all fell since they were electrocuted. Get up. More than half of them had died from cardiac arrest. In an instant, more than 80 people died. It can use lightning? Huangbo Nuing of the Huangbo clan spoke. He just realized that what he signed up for wasn't a battle with a wild beast. Spirit creatures use energy. Miss Jiggle, are you okay? It would be better if you stepped back for a while. Moyong Kong of the Moyong family tried to comfort Jiggle Sohee, who had been hurt. Even if she wasn't severely injured, he felt that it would be better to ask her to back off. Despite their concern, Sohee tried to go somewhere with a serious expression. Clench. Moyong Kong grabbed her wrist. Where are you going? We need to move. Leader Moyong. We need to inform the Lord of the demonic cult right away. About what? That dragon, it's trying to defeat us individually. If I am right, the first head appeared to examine the situation above. And it was no coincidence that our men were stopped. The other head should probab. Quack quack wang. Before she could finish her words, the ground shook once again. The vibration was rushing to the northwest side where the demonic cult's troops were located. Just as Jiggle Sohee predicted. Leader Moyong. We need to tell them to keep their distance from that thing. The contingents of the Yulin approached it hastily, and they ended up losing their lives. If the demonic cult's men were also hit by the dragon turtle's lightning without any defense, they would die. Moyong Kong frowned. He didn't want to help the demonic cult, but it would be difficult to deal with the dragon turtle if they lost too many troops. There is nothing to decide. You. Yes, father. Tell the demonic cult's contingents to keep as far away from the dragon turtle as possible. Hurry up. Yes. Moyong Kang's son, Moyong Yu, who had been listening to Jiggle Sohee's words, hurriedly moved to the northwest where the demonic cult was located. Moyong Kong, who sent him away, shouted to the surviving warriors. Keep your distance. Bring in the fire arrows. Yes. Since he was the only one who witnessed a dragon before, Moyong Kong had gone through all the ancestors' records and came to know about the use of the fire arrows. Upon receiving the orders, the warriors began to light up the arrows which they had prepared in advance. Meanwhile, Moyong Yu, who was heading to the northwest, couldn't hide his shock. Damn it. Already. Quack quack wang. He tried to outrun the dragon, but he couldn't beat the speed at which the dragon's huge neck moved. Suddenly, the third head of the dragon popped out from the ground. D-Dragon. Move away. The cries of the members from the demonic cult could be heard. Unlike when it blocked the advance of the Yulin troops, the dragon came up from right in the middle of their unit this time. If the dragon used the lightning in that position, everyone would die. Moyong Yu, who wanted to say it, shouted as loud as he could. Spread out right now. But the moment he shouted, the dragon's roar echoed everywhere. Quaha. And no. In front of Moyong Yu, a white flash of light appeared in the dragon's body and then made its way outside, causing lightning. Crackle. Naturally, he thought that all the cultists would get electrocuted and thrown away. But something unbelievable happened. Ugh. The lightning from the dragon didn't spread out like before, but went to one place in the ground and got absorbed by something. What went wrong? When he looked closely, all the cultists were bowing down, and they looked unharmed. In various places, something like iron bars were stuck in the ground. As if it had absorbed the lightning that the dragon emitted, they lit up blue. Crackle. Unbelievable. Did they stop the lightning from the dragon with that one thing? What the hell is that? What was even more shocking was that the lightning that had descended through the iron rods flowed into the ground, and the cultists were slowly breathing, making sure that they weren't affected by it. And when the lightning completely vanished. Success! Wah! All the cultists shouted at once. Chen Yuan looked at the footwear they were wearing. It was footwear, which had a sole that was made from hardening the sap of a tree, brought in as an imperial trade item. All the cultists were wearing them. Current dissipated to the ground had been reduced by over 90%. Lightning rod and rubber? I was skeptical, but this is a success, Nano. Chen Yuan's lips formed into a smile as he looked at the dragon.